Welcome to All Things Work. I'm your host, Ann Sparacco. Today, we're exploring strategic planning and how organizations can approach their objectives, whether they're mid-year, end of year, or anywhere in between, and how to successfully move forward. That's really the key to this sauce here. So joining us here to talk about this is Heather Haas, CEO of Advisa, a business management consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations create effective teams, leaders, and cultures empowering employees to thrive. Welcome to All Things Work, Heather.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're happy to have you. So tell us more about Advisa and the work you do.
Advisa is a leadership and culture development firm. So we've been in this business since 1986, a really long time. So we've seen a lot of change. What hasn't changed in that time is that organizations need humans to show up at work and bring their best efforts. So we really work with executive teams and HR professionals to help them create an intentional culture. And then we develop the leadership development experiences because leaders are the ones who activate that culture, those core values. So we're providing assessments, consulting, leadership development, training, coaching, everything in the realm of helping our clients become places where people love to work.
I love that, and every business and organization, has a different milestone they want to reach. So as organizations approach their different milestones throughout the year, it's really important they review their current objectives and assess their progress on their strategic goals. We know that's a key part in this process. So what are some of the most important questions they really should be asking?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of strategic planning methodologies out there, whether it's EOS or the one page strategic plan or anything in between. It's really about where are we now as a business? Where do we want to be in, 6 months, a year, 3 years? What's that vision that we're aiming toward? And then it's how will we get there? What are the moves we're going to make, the choices that we're going to make to get where we're trying to go? And then the question that I'm most partial to, given that what we do, is who is taking us there? If we know where we're headed, we've got goals and objectives to be the mile markers on the way. Who are the leaders that are responsible for really clarifying the work for their people and engaging the hearts and minds of the people that are on their teams?
Yeah, it's basically going back to the basics of education here: who, what, where, why, when, and
Yep,
how.
got
If you really got to get those answers before you really jump into it. So it's good, or at least have an idea of what those answers would be, because we know things change and shift. And we know the really big key to measuring success is key metrics or indicators organizations should use to really evaluate their progress effectively. So, what are some, effective ways that organizations can measure that?
So typically organizations are very clear on the financial metrics and the business outcomes that they're looking to accomplish. What we find is they're a little less clear on the actionable people data. What are we measuring on the people side of the business? So of course, productivity, turnover, but engagement is really important, really powerful. A lot of organizations are already, formally measuring engagement on an annual basis. I would also say that it's important for leaders and managers in their one-on-ones to be trying to understand what is the employee experience in the midst of our progress toward these goals and objectives. So that kind of information is important. I would also mention at Advisa, we have a leadership and culture assessment that's very specifically aimed at how do we surface how well leaders are doing, how effective are leaders at 16 behaviors that are correlated with high engagement, results oriented environments, and how well is the organization doing to attract and retain the best and brightest talent. So that's another example of actionable people data that can and should accompany a strategic plan and the metrics that go along with that.
So, a lot of importance is really placed on onboarding new employees, but in the case of planning ahead with an existing workforce, you've actually discussed an interesting concept called reboarding. Now, this really caught my attention here. So, can you really walk us through what reboarding is and why it's so important organizations consider this in their strategic planning efforts.
Reboarding, kind of a play off of onboarding, is how do you, after a new plan is put in place or a change has been enacted, how do you take a pause and managers sit down with employees to understand how has your work shifted? How has your role been impacted? Is this still a current and up to date job description? Let's get your KPIs aligned. So, reboarding is really just let's take a moment and think about the work and the person doing the work. And so, in a very practical way, we recommend that employees um, feel connected to their job, their manager, the team, and the culture of the organization. So, those four levels of connection are really what a manager can check in on in a reboarding conversation. So, the job connection is really about does that individual have the skills and the tools and the clarity to excel in doing the work that's aligned with what the team needs? So, that's job connection. Do they know what they're supposed to do and are they equipped to do it? Manager connection, of course, is the relational piece. Does my manager value me, know me, see me, develop me? So that trust between employee and manager is what really um, binds people to the organization. And in fact, a lot of research would show that the relationship between an employee and their manager is the most highly correlated element of employee engagement. So then there's team connection. That's about goals and roles. Do I know what I'm supposed to do on this team relative to what everyone else on the team is doing? And do I understand the diverse skill sets, mindsets, and even personalities of people on my team? And finally, the fourth level of connection that's important in reboarding is connecting to the culture of the organization, the core values, right? Do my personal values align with the values of the organization and the norms and the policies and just the vibe and the feeling of working there?
I love that. The collaboration part as well is wonderful on those 4 different levels to make the employee feel so much more connected. I feel like when a manager makes an employee feel seen, they're more willing to just put in that effort day to day.
Absolutely. It's especially important in virtual and hybrid environments where it can be a little harder to really build trust and get to know people as a human, not just the little, tile that I see when I'm in a Zoom meeting with someone. So those connections are really very, very vital to people showing up and doing good work, people's mental health and well being. In fact, the Surgeon General last year came out and declared an epidemic of loneliness. That's pretty powerful. There are lonely people popping on to your virtual meetings and walking in the doors of your organization. And so there's so much opportunity for leaders to step into that gap and be intentional about how we care for people, challenge people, and just in general build that connection, like I was referring to earlier.
So here at SHRM, we really love our research to back up our, broad discussions here. So the State of the Workplace report, which released just a couple months ago, highlights how in 2024, 62% of HR professionals reported their departments were operating beyond typical capacity. That's up from 57% in 2023. So we're seeing this increase here. So what are some practical steps you think organizations should take during their planning process to address issues such as staffing constraints or operational efficiencies because we know that can really hinder some progress.
No question. HR is typically a department in every organization that is so overburdened. There's so much to do and never enough time or people to do it. So, and the work is so important. So it's sort of that triple whammy. I think one of the things we recommend to our clients is that when you're in strategy season, the time of year where you're setting goals, making plans, it's important to also do what we call a talent review where you're evaluating, managers and leaders. They're each tasked with evaluating the performance and the potential of their team and kind of even plotting that out on a, performance on one axis, potential on another, and creating the boxes and understanding Who's high performance, high potential that we need to really retain and make sure we're really tuned in with what they need and how to grow them. Are there people who are low performance, low potential that we may need to help find a different role or even exit the organization? But all of that talent planning, the purpose of that is to identify talent gaps, to discuss it at a strategic level with executive leadership so that senior leaders understand here's where we're understaffed and here's the implication of that. So the extent to which HR professionals are fluent in the business objectives and what the organization is trying to achieve, that's what gives them the strength to advocate for additional headcount or shifting, reorganizing, whatever the case may be. But that talent review process is really important. I think the other thing that we all need to start thinking about it and embracing is how might AI tools remove some of the tactical or task oriented work that may be gobbling up a lot of time that could free up the humans to work on higher level things. So I think that's another way as we talk about, capacity constraints. um, AI is kind of big and scary, but it's also wildly exciting if we can, especially in HR, figure out how to harness the potential, get our teams trained up and comfortable with the idea that this helps us, this enables us go farther together, do more with less, as opposed to displacing jobs, which I think sometimes there is that fear. So if we can get around that, I think there's a ton of great opportunity there.
Yes, I agree, and I think our president and CEO, Johnny C. Taylor Jr., has kind of really said that a lot, especially in interviews. He's talked about how really the use of AI is going to free people up to focus on bigger strategies, bigger business goals. What's really important. Is so it takes a lot of the stress of the minuscule day to day tasks for you to really focus on the bigger goals of your job. So I love that you brought that up. We could talk for days on
I know.
AI. So we'll focus a little bit more now on our current discussion. So we know, beyond what's going on internally, we know there's a lot of external impacts. Macroeconomic and market level challenges, can really be obstacles for HR teams to execute those bigger goals that we're talking about today. And we know that it fluctuates, and a lot of things. One thing Johnny really says a lot is you have to try to outpace the change that's happening outside your organization within the organization. I think that's big hurdle to overcome. So, there's a lot of different ways we can tackle this, but how do you think leaders can collaborate best so HR priorities such as employee experience and professional growth, because we know those are important, are integrated into that broader strategy?
Well, I love that you use the word outpace, that organizations have to try to stay out ahead of and see around corners. And speed in an organization, getting things done, moving quickly to operationalize change, et cetera, having your culture aligned with your business aims is what creates that speed to value. And what I mean by that is if your business strategy is very entrepreneurial and you're trying to break into new markets and be incredibly innovative, you need a culture where the values and the leader behaviors and what's getting tolerated and celebrated is aligned with being innovative, taking risks. And so, very often, I think organizations don't realize that there's a process that you can follow. We teach our clients there's 5 drivers to create cultural competitive advantage. And the competitive advantage is our culture is aligned, the behaviors and mindsets of leaders and people in the organization matches the business strategy that we have in place. And that's what creates that speed. There's the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's been around forever. But what I am challenging people to think about is culture only derails strategy when it's not aligned. If we can help CEOs, especially, because this starts at the top, one of the most important drivers for culture is activation from above. CEOs have to own and relentlessly pursue the importance of getting our culture to a place where it's really fueling the achievement of our strategic objectives.
I just have this image in my head of this, train on a train track where the rails are, the culture alignment. If those rails
Yeah,
are not aligned, the train goes off track, but if it
that's a
is,
great
it
metaphor.
makes it, so that the train can go faster. So it's just a smoother, just railway system. So that's literally just what popped into my head, just to give a
I love it.
visual of, why it's so important to have that established, like you said. So I love that you brought up the workplace culture. SHRM here, we're really big on a healthy workplace culture and how it, you can just build upon that so easily. So we know that there's important steps here. So once that vision is really established, the next step, which is critical, is the operating plan.
Mhm.
So you got the vision. How do you make it work? So what steps can organization leaders really take to ensure their operating plans are not just, great to, hopefully make work, but really are realistic and even adaptable to change?
So important. The power of an operating plan is that people understand their role in it and they are equipped and coached and managed in positive and helpful ways to get there. So the most important piece, I think, when you have the activation from above, you have an executive team who has said culture is important to our achieving our goals. The next really important driver to that operationalizing is building trust and shared purpose. So leaders throughout the organization have to make explicit to their teams. This is the mission. This is where we're headed. This is our vision. And here are our goals, and here's your role in it. And most importantly, to cultural activation is here are our core values. These values represent the mindsets and behaviors that if we are all bringing that to the organization each day, it's going to hasten the achievement of these important metrics that we've laid out. So, trust and shared purpose, mission, vision, values, when you've got leaders who are crystal clear on what those things are and how their teams fit in, now they can start to bring that connectivity at that level to their teams and coach accordingly. And then the next really important thing to operationalizing a plan, leaders need training and development to be effective. Unfortunately, most leaders have never received any leadership development of any kind. They've done great work and now they have a team. And so we believe leaders deserve better. Leaders need access to learning experiences that are customized to include the mission, vision, values, and that answer the question that every leader is asking, which is, what am I supposed to say and do around here to be effective? What is effective leadership here? And we work with our clients to actually define 3 to 5 leader capabilities. And we then train and put together customized programs so that leaders and managers at all levels are being infused with the exact cultural artifacts and strategies that the senior leadership team has deemed are mission critical for success.
I think that's really great. And we also, talked about the need to adapt to the changes that, may be happening externally, not just outpacing, but really trying to pivot with that. So, how should organizations approach setting milestones and tracking progress when it comes to having to pivot or adjust plans?
Well, one of the things we teach in our programs is we call it the change iceberg. And we talk about above the waterline and below the waterline. Above the waterline are the, better, faster, stronger, all the very technical, measurable aspects of change, the way that we're responding to those external forces that are impacting our business. We're going to have to get out of that market, get into this market. We're going to increase market share by this much. We're going to reduce operating expense. That's all above the waterline. Those are the very technical pieces. It's below the waterline where behaviors and mindsets and power shifts sometimes need to happen. So that's where leader effectiveness comes in. We've got to be helping our people, showing up with empathy because change is hard, right? We've got to make a dramatic pivot. Oftentimes, people are not thrilled to do it. because it creates more work, it's disruption, stress, even fear. So leaders and managers have the opportunity to show up, meet people where they are, and demonstrate empathy. I was reading something recently that with, as AI, bringing it back to that, comes into the workplace, there are certain durable skills that will always be important, even as AI starts to take some pieces and parts of other things we used to do. Empathy is one of those durable skills. And so sometimes the resistance, managers are saying, it's so clear. This is why we need to change. Just do it, and they want to skip right over people's fears, frustrations, uncertainty. You're gonna have to go slow to go fast. If you take the time to really talk to people and say, okay, we've rolled out this big change, and I realize this is gonna be very disruptive for you. Tell me how you're feeling about it. Let people share that. And the coaching tip that I would give is that empathy is not agreement, right? You may have someone that starts complaining or very authentically sharing what they're upset about or what they don't like. You may completely disagree with their perspective. That's okay. Just listen. Listen, validate. I hear you. It sounds like you're really upset about this. My role is to try to collaborate with you to figure out how can we get going in that direction since we know that's a non-negotiable. We've got to do it, but I want to do it with you and I want to try to support you in making the turn. That's the go slow to go fast that, in our experience, really pays dividends as organizations are trying to manage tremendous amounts of change in all areas and at all levels.
I love that you brought up, the empathy doesn't mean you absolutely just agree with everything the person's saying. Just it takes away a lot of that stress and anxiety from the person when they feel like someone is listening and understands. Doesn't mean they have to go in that direction they want. So love that you define that a little bit more. So we know another part, not just empathy, but another part of being a human is, being kind of driven by fear a little bit. It's just very natural for people, especially in stressful times, to kind of really worry about those worst case scenarios. So, what are some of the best strategies leaders can really engage in when it comes to the what if mindset against these worst case scenarios without letting fear really drive the strategy here?
I think the most important thing is to have the conversations and get teams in a room, put the plans and the targets up or the proposed changes, whatever it is, and then ask questions. Questions are really our most powerful technology. So ask questions. What could go wrong here? What are you concerned about? What if this happened? What if that happened? How might we mitigate that risk? Just start asking all of the questions to get your team to engage and share what they're thinking about and how they're feeling. Because the scariest thing is the unknown. When we start to enter the danger and try to really tease out what's on your mind, and then one by one build some contingency plans and model out what is the worst case scenario and how would we respond? Now we start to bring that fear down a little bit because we've taken the unknown, we've empathized, we've also engaged critical thinking skills, and we've made it more known. And now we have a plan and we know how we're going to handle things as they come up. That's reassuring.
It is, and would you is that what you would call second order thinking? Because I know that there's a certain phrase that you use.
Yeah, the second order thinking is, when you make a change or you set out to do something, there's sort of the immediate effects of that. Second order thinking is to go a little further to explore what are all the ripples that might emanate out from making this change. We know what it's intended to do, but what are all the things that we haven't thought about? So, second order thinking is just trying to see around the corner, trying to anticipate what else is out there. And again, the more we do that, the more we reduce anxiety for people because we're talking about it, we're addressing it, and then we're able to put the supports in place to try to minimize any of the negative outcomes that could happen.
Anxiety is another part of just being human. So, do you have an example of when an organization really successfully used second order thinking and came out the other end saying that was completely worth that strategy?
We have several clients that we've worked with to help them align their culture with their business goals. And, for organizations, especially who are pursuing an acquisition strategy to drive growth, that comes with a lot of cultural implications. So we lead them through all of those questions I was asking earlier, saying, if you're going to acquire all these different types of companies and fold them into your organization, how might your people feel about that? We get why it makes sense on paper. We see the technical pieces of this and why it's an attractive financial move to make. But let's go one ripple out from that. How are certain teams going to be impacted? And how are you going to protect what is a very healthy nucleus of your core culture and values? How are you going to propagate that and welcome in the new employees and those other organizations and get them involved? So that's where executive teams that are willing to do that culture work along with the business planning and change work that they're doing, that's where you see really good results because the people and the culture then can start to enable um, whatever the new tactics or strategies that have been put in place.
Keep those train tracks aligned and
That's
everything
right.
will go smoothly. You'll get to your destination.
What we
um,
want.
s- so, I would love to break it down to three simple actionable steps for leaders, especially for our audience tuning in. So, what can leaders do to take today to align their strategic goals with those long term goals? We talked about it a little bit, but I would love to learn maybe some three steps.
Step one, I referenced it earlier, but activation from above. It's very important that if you're a leader or an HR professional, what your team is responsible for, make sure that you're having the conversation with the leader above you to understand the importance of what your team is doing, to understand directionally where they're headed and where they're going and what they care about. Because if you're clicked in with the level above you and you've got that activation from them to what your team is doing, now you're aligned. The second really important thing is that trust and shared purpose. So communicate mission, vision, values. Values in particular need to be broken down into behavioral terms so that everybody has the same understanding of these values because your values are the pillars of that intentional culture. That's where we start to have that shared purpose of how we treat each other and what behaviors get rewarded, celebrated, developed. Um, and we can even recruit for those kinds of behaviors. So, activation from above, trust and shared purpose, and then leader effectiveness. The third thing I would recommend is we've got to make sure that the development opportunities, whether those be formal programs that leaders are going through, or just coaching, or even informal learning opportunities inside the organization, all of those learning moments are opportunities to, again, infuse clarity into the conversation about what are we here to do and to infuse authentic connection and how do we get to know the people that are doing it. So the most effective leaders are doing both. They're able to drive toward business outcomes and connect and develop people along the way. It's both. And so investing in leadership development, I think, is absolutely mission critical as we continue to go into. I mean, the world of work is reinventing itself as we speak. And leaders need the chance to retool, reskill, even refresh, and find their confidence again.
I would love to leave our audience off with just one last tip from you and Advisa on just, how they can really move forward. You said communication is key. You talked about that a lot in building trust and confidence. What's a final thought you really love to leave our audience with as they move on from this episode?
I would say that leaders need to be led. And so, for the HR professionals that are listening, your leaders need you to lead them in some of these culture and employee engagement type strategies. They actually are craving your support And for those of you that are complete stretched too thin already, and you're juggling both the administrative pieces of HR and finding that you don't have enough time for the strategic people side, I would really encourage you find an outside partner. I mean, that's the role we play for our clients. We come alongside and partner with executive leadership teams and HR professionals to really help lead the leaders and give them the skills, the mindsets, the tools that they need to be effective carrying the culture. Um, Leaders don't have it all figured out. They need to be led.
Yes, yes, and everybody's human at the end of the day.
That's
So,
right.
thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your wonderful insight. I really loved, the people-centric strategies here and the concrete advice you were able to, provide our audience. I hope everybody's able to move on, not feeling so much of that pressure, but feeling like they have kind of a better idea of how to align their goals. So, thank you so much for providing your insight today.
Thank you. This was wonderful. And we're really passionate about all of this. So excited to hopefully inspire people who are listening, and always here to help anybody who's looking for advice, guidance, or consulting on these topics.
All right, thank you, Heather. That's going to do it for this week's episode of All Things Work. For more information, just head to shrm.org/allthingswork to sign up for our newsletter and get more information on our research. You can also follow us on social media on the SHRM pages. Like, comment, share. We want you to be part of the conversation. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.
SHRM.